Welcome back to another episode. It is just myself again, as Rogel is, at the time of this recording, is currently traveling abroad and on vacation, enjoying much needed break that he thinks he deserves. No, seriously, he does. So he's not here currently. He will be back shortly, hopefully. That's the game plan. So, but without further ado, it's just myself today, Sig. So I hope you enjoy this episode, and it's going to be very similar to one that I've done in recently. I believe it was summertime, where we read Reddit stories of "Am I the Asshole?" However, because it is October, aka spooky season, aka Halloween time, we're going to dive in to creepypasta, and we're going to read some of the highest rating original creepypastas from back in the day. If you're not familiar with what creepypasta is, they are horror stories. They're trippy, kind of like think Reddit, but a lot darker and typically with more malice and just weird, super weird shit. I really don't know how to explain creepypasta. It's been around for a long time. But these is also where like a lot of recent lores came from. By recent, I mean like in the last 10 to 20 years, a lot of lores came from, a lot of rumors and speculations and conspiracy theories. I believe SlenderMan actually originated from creepypasta. I could be drastically wrong on that one, because now that I say it out loud, it sounds inaccurate. But we're going to go through and we're going to read some of these creepypastas and, honor of it being spooky season. And of course, if you like this type of content, make sure you add it to your playlist on whatever platform you're listening to, whether it's iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, Google, Samsung, FM radio, like all the freaking platforms, or over on YouTube as well. So without further ado, let's get into it. All right, the first story that we're going to look at is called Ticci-Tobby. It was written and posted, or it was posted at least. I don't know about written, but it was posted back on March 2nd, 2015. And it's one of the highest rating stories out here on creepypastas for one of the most famous creepypasta stories, I should say, to specify. So it got 9.1 out of 10. So let's get into it, and fucking bear with me. I'm sure I'm going to mispronounce a lot of words. So let's get into this. All right. Again, story name is called Ticci-Tobby, written by Castaway. The long road home seemed to go on and on. The road continued to stretch in front of the vehicle endlessly. The light that shone through the branches of the tall green trees danced across the windows in random patterns, and every once in a while obnoxiously shine in your eyes. The surroundings were full of deep green trees, forming a forest around the road. The only sound was the sound of the car's engine as it traveled down the path. It was peaceful and left a serene feeling. Although the ride seemed like a nice one, it lacked every form of nice from its two passengers. The middle-aged woman behind the steering wheel had neat short brown hair that fit her complexion quite well. She wore a green V-neck t-shirt and a pair of blue jeans. Diamond stud earrings decorated each of her ears, which partially showed from behind her haircut. She had deep green eyes, which her shirt brought out, and the lighting seemed to make them more noticeable. There wasn't anything significant about her appearance. She looked like any other average mother you would see on TVs. However, the one thing that made her different than the average mothers was the deep bag she had under her eyes. Her facial expression was gloomy and sad, although she genuinely looked like someone who smiled a lot. She would sniffle every once in a while and occasionally glance in the rearview mirror to look at her son in the back seat, who was hunched over partially with his arms held tight around his chest and his head pressed against the cold window. The boy lacked any normal appearance, and anyone could plainly see there was something wrong with him. His messy brown hair went every which way, and the luminescent light brought out his pale, almost gray skin. His eyes were dark, unlike his mother's, and he wore a white t-shirt and scrub pants that had been provided for him by the hospital. The clothes he had worn before were so shredded and bloodstained that they weren't wearable anymore. The right side of his face bared a few cuts along with a split eyebrow. His right arm was bandaged all the way up to the shoulder, which had been shredded when his right side hit the shattered glass. His injuries appeared to be painful when in reality he couldn't feel anything. This was just one of the glories of being him. One of the challenges he had to face while growing up was growing up with a rare disease that caused him to be completely numb towards pain. Never before had he felt himself get hurt. He could have lost an arm and felt nothing. The other major disorder he had faced, which was one that deemed him many insulting nicknames in the short time he attended grade school before he switched to homeschooling, was his Tourette's syndrome, which caused him to tick and twitch in ways he couldn't control. He would crack his neck uncontrollably and twitch every once in a while. The kids would tease him and called him Ticci-Tobby, and they mocked him with exaggerated twitching and laughing. It got so bad he had to turn to homeschooling. It was too hard for him to be in a common learning environment with seemingly every kid poking or more like stabbing fun at him. Toby stared blankly out the window, his face empty of any emotion, and every few minutes his shoulder, arm, or foot would twitch. Every bump that the car tires hit would make his stomach turn. Toby Rogers was the boy's name, and the last time Toby remembered riding in a car was when it crashed. That's all he thought about, unconsciously replaying everything he remembered before he blacked out over and over again. Toby had been the lucky one. His sister had not been so lucky. When the thought of his sister came, he couldn't help the tears that welled up in his eyes. The horrible memories replayed in his mind, her screaming that had cut off when the front of the car was smashed in. It all went blank for a moment before Toby opened his eyes to see his sister's body, her forehead pierced with glass shards, her hips and legs crushed underneath the force of the steering wheel, and her torso pushed in from the too late inflated airbag. That was the last thing he had seen of his dear older sister. The road home continued on for what seemed like forever. It took so long to get home because his mom wanted to avoid the sight of the crash. When the surroundings gave way to a familiar neighborhood, they were both more than ready to get out of the car and step back into their own home. It was an older neighborhood with quaint little houses all next to each other. The car drove in front of a blue house with white window panes. They both quickly noticed the old vehicle that was parked in front of the house and the familiar figure that stood in the driveway. Toby felt automatic anger and frustration take over him at the sight of his father who wasn't there. His mother pulled the car up in the driveway beside him before turning off the engine and preparing to step out and face her husband. "Where is he?" Toby quietly said. "Where is he?" Toby said quietly as he looked back at his mother who reached to open the door. "He's your father, Toby. He's here because he wants to see you." His mother's response responded in a monotone voice, trying to sound less shaky. Yet couldn't drive up to the hospital to see Lyra before she died. Toby narrowed his eyes out the window. "He was drunk that night, honey. He couldn't drive," she said, before Toby cut her off. When is he not drunk?" Toby pushed the door open before his mother and stumbled onto the driveway, where he met his father's gaze before looking down at his feet with a stern expression. His mother stepped out behind him and met her husband's eyes before walking around the car. His father opened up his arms, expecting a hug from his wife, but she walked past him and put her arm around Toby's shoulder and started leading him inside. "Connie, her husband began to say in a raspy voice. What, no welcome home hug, huh? She ignored her husband's obnoxious words and walked past him with her son under her arm. Hey, he's 16. He can walk by himself. His father began to follow them in. He's 17. Connie glared back at him before opening the door to the house and stepping inside. Toby, why don't we get you in your room to rest, okay? I'll come get you when dinner's ready. No, I'm 16. I can walk by myself, Toby said sarcastically and glared back at his father before stumbling up the small staircase and turning into his room, where he slammed the door violently. His little room didn't have much in it. Just a small bed, a dresser, a window, and his walls had 4 picture frames of his family, back when they were a family. Before his father became an alcoholic and acted violently towards the rest of his family, Toby remembered when he was arguing with his mom and he grabbed her by the hair and shoved her on the floor. And when Lyra had tried to break it up, he pushed her and she hit her head on the corner of the kitchen counter. Toby could never forgive him for what he did to his mother and sister. Never. Toby didn't care how much his father beat him down. He couldn't feel it anyways. What he did care about was how he intentionally hurt the only 2 people he cared about. And when he was waiting in the hospital where his sister took her last breaths, the only one who didn't rush there was his dad. Toby stood in the window and looked out at the street. He could have sworn he saw something out of the corner of his eye, but quickly blamed it on the meds he was currently on. When dinner time had come and his mother called up to him, Toby came down the stairs and hesitantly sat down at the table across from his father, and in between his mother and an empty chair. It was quiet as his parents picked at their food, but Toby refused to eat. Instead, he watched his dad with a blank stare. His mother caught on to his staring and elbowed him slightly. Toby looked over at her slightly and then down at his uneaten food, which he still didn't touch. Toby laid in B. He pulled his covers over his head and stared at the window. He was tired, but there was no way he would fall asleep. He couldn't. There was too much to think about. He had been debating on whether or not to follow his mother's directions and forgive his father, or continue holding a grudge with his boiling hatred towards his father. He heard his door creak open and his mother padded in the room and sat on the bed next to him. She reached over and rubbed his back, which had been turned to her. I know it's hard, Toby, trust me, I understand, but I promise you'll get better, she said softly. When is he going to leave? Toby said with an innocent tone in his shaky voice. Connie let her gaze fall down to her feet. I don't know, honey. He's staying as far as I know, she replied. Toby didn't respond. He just continued to look forward at the wall, holding his damaged arm near his chest. After a few minutes of silence, his mother sighed before she leaned in to kiss his cheek and stood up to walk out the room. Good night, she said, as she closed the door. The hours passed slowly, and Toby couldn't quit tossing and turning. Every time he let his imagination take over, he heard the screeching of the tires, the screaming of his sister, and he would uncontrollably jerk in bed. He threw off his covers, and laying on his back, he pulled his pillow over his face and cried into it. He could hear his own pitiful weeping. He would have been screaming and crying if he didn't press his pillow over his face. After a few seconds, he threw the pillow off his face and sat up, hunched over, holding his head and breathing roughly, tears streaming from his eyes. He couldn't help but cry. He tried to keep it in, but he couldn't stop the whining and whimpering as he sat there shaking. He inhaled before he stood up and walked around his bed to the window and peered out, taking deep breaths, trying to calm down. He rubbed his eyes and looked out at the group of tall pine trees across the street. He stopped suddenly, and his gaze slowly centered on something standing under the streetlight. He heard ringing in his ears and couldn't look away. The figure stood beside the streetlight, about 2 feet shorter than it did, long arms draped at its sides and staring up at him with non-existing eyes. The figure had no facial features to speak of, no eyes, no mouth, no nose. Yet it held Toby hypnotized stare, seemingly peering into his very being. The ringing in his ears grew louder and louder each second he stared, before suddenly it went black. The next morning, Toby woke up in his bed. He felt different. He wasn't tired at all, and when he consciously woke up, it felt like he had been lying there awake for hours. He had no thoughts flowing through his mind. He sat up slowly and stumbled over to the wall. But when he stood up, he automatically felt dizzy. He stumbled to the doorway and walked down the stairs. His parents were sitting at the table. His father was tuned in to the small TV that sat at the countertop, and his mother was reading a newspaper. She quickly looked over when she felt Toby's presence looming behind her. "Well, good morning, sleepyhead. You've been sleeping forever," she greeted him with a hesitant smile. Toby slowly looked over at the clock and noticed that it was 12:30 p.m. "I made you breakfast, but it got cold. I was going to wake you, but I felt you needed to sleep." Her expressions fell from happy to worried as her son resisted responding to her. "Are you all right?" Toby stumbled over and sat by his father. He felt as if he was on an idle and had no control over his actions. He was seeing everything he did, but it didn't register in his brain properly. He reached out to his father's arm, but his hand ended up getting slapped. His father turned to him abruptly and pushed his chair over with his foot. "Don't touch me, boy," he yelled. His mother stood up. All right, knock that off. That is the last thing we need." The days went by and things continued as they were. Connie spent most of her time cleaning the house, and her rude husband spent most of his time ordering her around. It was just like how it used to be before the crash. Toby never really left his room. He would sit by his bed and tremble. His mind would wander, but his thoughts changed too fast to be remembered. He would pace around a small room like a caged animal or stare out the window. The unhealthy cycle continued. Connie continued to be pushed around by her husband, being way too submissive to him, and Toby remained in his room. Before he could think twice, he would begin to chew on his hands, tearing the flesh from his fingers. He would gnaw his hands until they bled. When his mother walked in on him while he was doing so, she reacted horribly. She rushed him downstairs and grabbed the first aid kit, wrapping his hands in bandages. Afterwards, she demanded that he wouldn't leave her side again. Toby isolated himself so much that he grew up to hate being around others. His memory grew glitchy as well. He started missing memories of minutes, hours, days, and so on. He would begin talking nonsense about things completely unrelated to the conversation he would have. He'd go off about seeing things, sharks in the sink as he washed the dishes, hearing crickets in his pillow, and seeing ghosts outside his bedroom window. His mother grew so anxious about his mental health that she decided it would be good for him to talk to a professional about what he was feeling. Connie walked Toby into the building, holding his hand and guiding him in. She walked up to the front desk and began talking to the lady who sat behind it. "Mrs. Rogers?" the lady asked. "Yes, that's me," Connie nodded. "We're here to see Dr. Oliver. I'm here with Toby Rogers?" "Yes, right this way." The lady stood and led them down a long hallway. Toby looked at the framed artwork down the halls and tuned in to the sound of the lady's high heels on the hardwood floor. She opened the door to a room with a table and 2 chairs. "If we can get him to sit in here for a few minutes, I'll get the doctors." She smiled and held the door open. Toby stumbled into the room and sat down at the table. He looked over at his mother and the lady before the door slowly shut behind them. He looked around the room before he held up his tightly bandaged hands and began to bite at the bandages to unwrap his hands. But he was interrupted as the door swung open and a young woman in a black and spotted dress with light blonde hair stepped in, holding a clipboard and pen. "Toby?" she asked with a smile. Toby looked up at her and nodded. "Nice to meet you, Toby. My name is Dr. Oliver." She put her hand out for him to shake, but hesitantly pulled away when she noticed his bandaged hands. "Oh," she smiled nervously before clearing her throat and sitting in the chair across the table from him. "So I'm going to ask you a few questions. Try to answer them as honestly as possible, okay?" She placed her clipboard down on the table. Toby nodded slowly and held his restrained hands on his lap. "Paul, how old are you, Toby?" 17, he responded. She wrote that down on the paper that was clipped to the clipboard. "And what is your full name?" "Toby Aaron Rogers." "And when is your birthday?" "April 28th. "Who is your immediate family?" Toby paused for a minute before answering the question. "My mom, my dad, and..." He stopped. My sister." "I heard about your sister, dear. I'm really sorry." Her expression faded into a sad, pity-filled look. Toby nodded. "Do you remember anything from the crush, Toby?" Toby looked away from her. His mind went blank for a moment. He looked down at his lap, and in the surrounding areas, he heard a faint ringing sound. His eyes widened, and he froze in place. "Toby?" the counselor asked. "Toby, are you listening?" Toby felt a shiver down his spine until he froze again, and slowly looked out the little window through the door, where he saw it, a dark, featureless figure peering in at him. He stared, eyes widened, the ringing growing louder and louder until suddenly the loud noise of the counselor broke his trance. "Toby!" she yelled. Toby jumped and fell sideways out of his chair and back up into the corner. Dr. Oliver stood up, holding her clipboard to her chest, a surprised look in her eyes. Toby met her eyes again, his breath hitching as he twitched. That night, Toby laid in bed. His eyes were dazed as he stared straight up at the ceiling. He could feel himself begin to doze off when he heard the scattering of footsteps down his hallway. He sat up and looked towards the doorway, his door wide open. There was no light. Everything was lit by a luminescent blue glow of the moon through his window, leaving a cold lighting. He stood up and slowly made his way towards the doorway, when suddenly the door, which previous was wide open, slammed in his face. He gasped and fell back. He was out of breath when he hit the ground and began breathing heavily, his eyes wide open. He waited for a few seconds before getting back upon his feet. He reached out, grasped the cold door handle with his bandaged hand, and it creaked open. He looked out into the dark hallway and tiptoed out of his room. The window at the end of the hallway lit up the darkness with blue moonlight as he padded his way down. He could hear footsteps rustling around him, and faint giggling followed by the pitter-patter of small feet, which sounded like a child had run in front of him, giggling and running around. The hallway was a lot longer than he remembered. It seemed endless, like the ride home from the hospital that night. He heard the door creak in front of him. "Mom?" he called in a shaky voice. Suddenly, a door slammed behind him, and he jumped and turned around. Behind him, he heard a long, eerie groan that sounded like croak right in front in his ear. He turned around as fast as he could and was suddenly face to face with none other than his dead sister. His eyes were cloudy white, or her eyes were clouded white, her skin pale, the right side of her jaw dangling there by tissue and muscle, glass protruding from her forehead, black blood leaking down her face, her blonde hair pulled up in a ponytail as it was always, and she was wearing her gray t-shirt and athletic shorts, which were dirty and spotted with blood. Her legs were bent in ways they shouldn't be. She stood emitting a long, croaking noise only an inch away from Toby's face. Toby yelped and fell back. "Ah!" He started to crawl backwards away from her, but he was unable to break the eye contact he held with her blank, dead eyes. He dragged himself backwards until he backed up into something. He stopped for a second. Everything was dead silent except for his heavy breathing and crying. He slowly looked up to meet the blank face of a tall, dark figure, the same figure that stood over him now. Behind the tall, dark mask were rows of children, looking to range from 3 to 10 years old. their eyes completely black, and dark black blood leaked from their eye sockets. He screamed and stood up as fast as he could, only to be tripped by dark black tendrils that wrapped around his ankle. He fell straight onto his stomach and he got the wind knocked out of him. He tried to scream, but he couldn't make a sound. He wheezed out before it all went black. Toby woke with a start. He screamed out and sat up as fast as he could, completely short of breath. He wheezed out and held his chest with his bandaged hands. It was just a dream. Just a dream. He lay back down on his bed and rolled over on his side. It felt like against weight had been lifted off his chest as he took a deep breath. He stood up and padded over to his window. He saw nothing. Nobody was out there. No ghosts, no figures, nothing. He heard the rustling and coughing of his father outside the doorway. His door was closed. He walked over and opened it. Looking out into the hallway once again, he padded down the hallway and into the kitchen where he found his dad standing and having a smoke in their living room. Toby waited for a second and watched him from around the corner before a burning feeling started deep in his chest. Deep, boiling anger overtook him. He heard the little imaginary voices in his head. Do it, do it, do it, they chanted. He turned away and held his arms. He felt like he actually had control over himself, unlike he did the past few weeks since he got home from the hospital. He actually had complete thoughts for just a moment before the chanting of his little voices in his head clouded them. Kill him. Wasn't there. Wasn't there. Kill him. Kill him. They continued on. Toby trembled. No, he wasn't going to do it. What was he going crazy? No. He won't kill anyone. He can't. He hated his father, but there was no way for him. No way he was going to just kill him. That was it. The last thought he had before he fell into an idle state once again. The influence of the voices in his head were too much. He began to silently walk up behind his father. He reached over the counter to the knife in the case. He gripped it in his hand. He felt the sensation take over his chest. He let out a snicker. He began laughing so hard he had to gasp for breath. His father turned around abruptly before he felt brute force shove him to the floor. He grunted as the air was knocked out of him. What? He looked up at the boy who stood over him, grasping the kitchen knife in his hand. Toby, what are you doing? He went to sit up and put his arms out in front of him in self-defense, but before he knew it, Toby was on top of him. He went to grab his neck, but his father reached out and blocked his hand from grabbing onto his wrist. Or by grabbing onto his wrist. Stop! Get off me, you little fucker! He yelled, and his other hand threw an off-centered punch towards Toby's shoulder, but he didn't stop. The look in Toby's eyes was not sane. It looked as if a demon had taken control over him. He yelled back and went to stabbing the knife into his father's chest, but his father blocked him and grabbed onto his wrist once again. He went and shoved him back, but Toby kicked his feet out in front of him and landed a hard blow straight to his father's face. His father recoiled and pulled his arms away to cuff his face, but Toby got back up and drove the knife straight into his shoulder. His father let out a loud cry and went to pull the knife out, but before he could, Toby threw his fist straight into his face. He began to pound his fist into his head, laughing and wheezing. He cracked his neck and grabbed the knife and ripped it out of his father's shoulder. He drove it deep into his dad's chest and repeatedly stabbed him into his torso, blood spilling out and getting splattered everywhere. He didn't stop until his father's body went still. He threw the knife over to the side and leaned over his body, coughing and panting. He stared at his father's smashed-in face and sat there twitching until a loud scream broke the silence. He looked over to see his mother standing just a few feet away, covering her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "Toby!" she screamed. "Why did you do that?" she cried. Why? She screamed. Toby stood up and began to back away from his father's bloody corpse. He began to back out of the kitchen. He looked down at the blood-soaked bandages on his hands and looked up at his mother one last time before he turned and ran out the house. He ran into the garage and slammed his hand against the control panel on the wall and pushed the button to open the garage door. Before he ran out, he noticed his father's hatchets, which had been hanging on the tool rack above a table full of jars filled to the brim with old, rusted nails and screws. One of the hatchets was new. It had a bright orange handle and a shiny blade. The other was old with a wooden handle and an old dull blade. He grabbed both and looked down at the table and saw a box of matches. And under the table was a red gasoline tank. He held both of the hatchets in one hand, grabbed the matches and gasoline before running out of the garage. Down the driveway and up the street he went. As he approached the street light that he could see out his bedroom window, he heard police sirens in the distance. He turned around and the red and blue flashing light came rushing down the street. Toby stood there for a second before he pulled open the cap on the gasoline tank and ran down the street, spilling gasoline all over the street after him. He turned and ran into the trees. He poured the last bit of gasoline out before he reached in his pocket and pulled out a match. He struck it against the box and immediately dropped it. In an instant, flames burst around him. The fires caught on the trees and bushes around him, and before he knew it, he was surrounded by fire. The silhouette of police cars were visible through the flames as he backed away into the forest around him. He looked around, but his vision was blurred. His heart was pounding, and he closed his eyes for just a moment. This was it. This was the end. Toby felt a hand on his shoulder. He opened his eyes and looked over to see a large white hand with long, bony fingers resting on his shoulder. He followed the arm that was attached to the hand up to the dark, towering figure. It appeared to be wearing a dark black suit, and its face was completely blank. It towered over Toby's small frame as it looked down on him. Tendrils reached out from its back. Before Toby knew it, his vision blurred and he heard the sounds of ringing in his ears. Everything went black. That was it. That was the end. That was how Toby Rogers died. A few weeks later, Connie sat in her sister's kitchen. Her sister, Lori, sat next to her drinking a cup of coffee. About 3 weeks ago, Connie lost her husband and her son, and just a few weeks before, she had lost her daughter in a car crash. Since then, she moved in with her sister. The police were keeping her busy. They had just finished up cleaning up the case, and the story had been released 2 weeks ago. The focus of the world seemed to have shifted to completely new stories. Lori switched the TV on to a news broadcast. On the TV, the news reporter began introducing the new headlines. We have breaking news. Last night there had been reported the murder of 4 individuals. There are no suspects yet, but the victims were a group of middle school kids who had been out in the woods late last night. The kids had been bludgeoned and stabbed to death. The investigators have discovered a weapon at the crime scene. It appears to be an old and dull-bladed hatchet, as you can see here, says the news reporter. The picture changed to show snapshots of the weapon, exactly as it was left at the crime scene. Investigators have pulled the name of a possible suspect, Toby Rogers, a 17-year-old boy who stabbed his father to death just a few weeks ago and tried to cover up his escape by setting a fire in the street and forest area around the neighborhood. Although they believe the young boy had died in the fire, investigators suspect Rogers might still be alive due to the fact that they never found his body. The end. I was right, SlenderMan. Yeah. That's SlenderMan. That describes SlenderMan to like a T, right? I guess I never actually truly read the Ticci-Tobby from back in 2015. But so again, that entire story is on CreepyPasta underneath Ticci-Tobby, written by Castaway. So that was like, whoo, okay. A lot of weird shit. But that's CreepyPasta. Honestly, a great place, like if, especially for like Halloween time, or if you're just into horror stories, weird, creepy shit. Definitely check out CreepyPasta. So let's see about another one, fairly shorter one. So let's look into this. All right. So this next story is called Hoodie, the Hooded Man, and it's especially compared to the last story. Um, this is a very short story. Multiple dates are set in place, and this all kind of takes place back in 2004. Let's see who this was written by. Um, doesn't it doesn't say. It just says it was written by anonymous author. So let's get into this again. The story is called Hoodie, the Hooded Man. I don't make this shit up. Have you ever been influenced by clothing? I don't mean confidence by look. Have you ever been given more control than ever by an item or a truth or just a favorite shirt? Have you ever been influenced in the worst way by showing the truth? The following is taken directly from a journal entries. The entries were written by a notorious but unknown killer. He is notorious in the means that everybody has seen his work. He is unknown because nobody knows that he has done it. His origin is unusual. No troubles, no evil family, no magic, and no paranormal forces. His life was chosen by him and him alone. His identity is also unknown. He will be named from here on out as the Hooded Man. April 3rd, 2004. It's been really cold around here. I don't have anything really to cover myself. All I have are my t-shirts and jeans. So today I decided to get a jacket. I just in a local store, nothing special. It's a black hoodie with a white lining. I think it looks pretty cool. And when I tried it on, the attendant said it suits me fine. I said thanks to be polite. Common courtesy is so hard to find it afterwards. So I bought it. I haven't taken it off yet. Not only is it warm, but I can really see myself doing amazing things in it. When I look at the mirror, I smirk. I feel amazing. I can't really explain it, but I like it. I really like it. I feel the need to put my hood up. Something about the hood has a way of masking a person. Even though it shows their face, it hides something somewhere. It's really late right now. I've been feeling so great all day. Time flew around me. I'll explain more tomorrow. April 10th. I've had a hell of a week. It felt so great. I walked the halls like a big shot. I'm sure I look smug. That's why Jack challenged me. He was so angry. Who never do ignoring an insult was more insulting than responding with shrewd comments about someone's family. He antagonized me. He asked for it. He threw a hard punch, and I stood. It stung harder than before when I actually argued with him. I felt so cool all week. My confidence kept me up. I punched him hard in the stomach and I lifted him up with an underhook. It felt so good. Really did. Parents are calling me. April 14th. Jack still isn't in out of the hospital. They said he's in a lot of pain. He spit a lot of blood. His parents told me over the phone. I reflected on it, on how great it felt when my fists connected, how his cracked scream sounded. That's good to hear, I said blankly. I don't care about Jack. I smiled at his pain. I kept staring. I kept staring at my mirror. I'm always wearing my favorite hoodie. It felt so empowering. My friends would laugh at what I say. They would compare me to Spider-Man in his black suit. Spider-Man threw his power away. I don't plan on doing anything with my source of confidence. April 22nd. Jack has gone to a better place. The words that rang through my ears. He's dead. He lost too much blood. His father told me the day I visited that he was losing blood due to personal health condition. But the way his mother looked at me told me the real story. I killed him. I still remember the satisfaction of hitting him. I never wanted to kill him. I need to think about what I've done. Right? That'll fix my feelings. But what's there to think about? Regret is a foolish emotion after all, and I don't need to regret it. April 24th. Dad has been avoiding me lately, and Mom tells me she loves me. They both want me to feel endless guilt, but I won't. Or rather, I can't. I can fake it for the public, but the truth is, I'm not sorry. Spider-Man's story is starting to make me think more. But why would a cursed or a possessed hoodie land in my possession? Everybody who knew Jack glares at me. Everyone who I would talk to have transferred themselves out of my class or went to a different school. Teachers don't look at me much or get onto me if I'm breaking any rules. Today I threw a pencil at my history teacher. It hit his shoulder. He just froze for a second and continued on with what he was doing. Everyone either hates me and or probably wants me dead, or they fear me. My writing is the only comfort I have. I can be at peace and let myself go here. April 25th. They provoked me. They threatened me. I had no choice. They would have killed me. My hood protected my face. The knife naturally moved from Rob's hand to mine. I didn't mean to. The writing was short line at this point. April 30th. 5 days. 5 days being interrogated and sleeping in a cell. They decided I was only defending myself. I can hear my mom and dad talking. They want me gone. They're both scared. I was an idiot to think that this jacket of mine was possessing me or changing my personality. It's just a really cool jacket. I love how it looks. I feel like such a badass. I remember how I put the hood up. I I put it up when Jack challenged me. I put it up when those guys tried to kill me. I feel no remorse. I feel indifferent. I'm in control. I have finally come to realize insanity. I wanted to kill them. All of them. I needed only a push. And the confidence to fight, I got it. Mom and dad are irritating me. They are all irritating. That's the end of that story. Look, okay, so first off, if you're writing shit, whether putting on Reddit, CreepyPasta, Facebook, in an actual journal, like digital journal, and I get this is supposed to be like written from a journal entry, like an actual book. If you're doing this on like a digital platform type thing, please, for the love of God, use spell check. Use a grammar check. I felt so stupid at times of reading that story because I was stumbling around trying to read word for word how they written it, and it was hurting my fucking brain because it was not written properly all the time. Okay, I get it. I get it. It was supposed to be written as though like from a journal. I get it. Let's see if we can find another story. Hopefully one that's written a little bit better than that one, or a lot better than that one. And like the first one, Ticci-Tobby, again, read it how it was written, so there was some inaccuracies with the writing. But let's carry on and find us another story to round this entire episode out. All right, speaking of SlenderMan, I actually found the forum or the story that is just called the SlenderMan. So let's take a look at this one because I feel like Ticci-Tobby is probably a better um, script for SlenderMan. However, Ticci-Tobby took place in 2005, was it? Let's double check that again before I totally just like shit the bed on. No. Okay, so Ticci-Tobby was written 2015. This post titled The Slenderman is from September 2012. So 3 years before Ticci-Tobby. And no, I fucking didn't research any of this prior. I'm literally reading this as I'm recording this episode, so don't think you should have done this back or you should have done this in order. No, fucker, I did. This is all unscripted. So chill out. Anyways, I'm talking to myself. Let's get into this. Again, this one is one of the more famous creepypastas. Not as high rating as Ticci-Tobby. This is 8.89. Ticci-Tobby was 9.1. And the Hoodie, or Hoodie-Man, that one was 9.05, something like that. 9.0. So, anyways, on to reading the SlenderMan. Again, stories on creepypasta. This is not my story. Please, just understand that. Let's get after it. There it is again. What is that thing? I can't take it anymore. It's like everywhere I go, all I see is this horrible, tall, thin, and seemingly faceless creature. It's been haunting my dreams as well ever since I first saw it. All it does is stand there and watches me. I can't shake this constant feeling of being watched. It's like I'm never alone. Hate it. I can't go to sleep. I can't go outside. I can't function as a normal person anymore without it being there. I've done a lot of research on it the last couple days, Googling what I can best describe it as. All I could remember was it being an impossibly tall, thin man. I say impossibly because no human could be that height and that thin. It's just not goddamn natural. I tried my best to remember its face. I figured that would help narrow the search, but there wasn't one. I have no memory of seeing this thing's face. It was always just a blur. But then, I could never look at it long enough without feeling uneasy. I usually just walked in the other direction or something, or if it was a dream or a nightmare at that, I would always wake up before I could get a clear look at it. Well, the search provided me with something called SlenderMan. What the fuck is a SlenderMan? This mythical creature is a thing that's been stalking me? No, it can't be. I refuse to believe it. I've not left my house in 2 days. I've been held up reading all these SlenderMan stories and accounts. Needless to say, sleep has eluded me for the duration. Nothing's going right anymore. I think I've angered it by not letting it in my dreams. I keep hearing banging on the windows late at night and creaking of the floorboard as I'm laying in bed. I know they say houses do that on their own, but this feels different. The creaks aren't that of the house settling. There's weight behind them, like soft footsteps. However, every time I go to look, there's something there. But when I re-enter my room, I always get the sensation being watched. Tell me, have you ever been sitting around in the room by yourself, windows and doors closed, when suddenly a door opens for no reason? I think everybody has, right? But no, I'm just different. I swear it's not the draft. I've had all the windows locked for about a week now. I'm not one to believe in ghosts or anything of the sorts, but this just has an eerie feeling to it. Whenever the doors spontaneously open, it gets noticeably colder in the room. The second I leave the room, however, all the other rooms are back to normal. So it's not like my thermostat's on the brink. Any room, however, except my room. My room has been getting cold recently. Really cold. I resorted to lighting candles all around the room to try and heat the place up. I don't know what's happening. I swear, I'm starting to lose it. I went outside for the first time in over a week today. I thought maybe my delusions were coming from being cooped up and spending too much time scaring myself reading about this SlenderMan. I went through my day-to-day life as best as I could, and to my surprise, no sighting of that thing. Everything was going fine. In fact, I was starting to forget about the whole thing. That is, until I was heading home. I was walking through the woods, trying to take in as much fresh air as I could as much fresh air as possible before I went home. And when I stumbled across a piece of paper lying there in the middle of my footpath, I normally have just written off to be some litter left by someone, but it was crisp white. It looked like it had been carefully placed there, no longer than maybe perhaps 20 minutes ago. I picked it up and turned it over. It was a drawing of that thing, the SlenderMan. A very crude sketch depicted him with the words "No, no, 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 no" scribbled down the sides of the page. As I tried to decipher the page, the clouds quickly darkened, turning into a heavy black. I best get home quick before the rain hits, I thought to myself. Now I'm home, sitting, staring at this fucking picture, going out of my mind, trying to figure out just how it got to where it was, thinking about how new it looked and wondering what sick fuck drew this and just left it there for me. I'm just gonna go to bed. I'd be as well to get some sleep anyways. I swear, that picture's cursed. Slenderman was in my dreams again last night. It seemed so real. I was laying in my bed in the dream and I had woken up and seen him standing there in the corner of my room. I tried to scream, move, do anything, but I couldn't. I lay there, frozen in fear, wondering what would happen. He just lifted his arm and stretched it a good 10 feet to the headboard of my bed and rested his hand. I say hand, but they didn't feel quite like hands, more like tendrils. Rested his hands over my eyes and went back to sleep. When I woke up, there was nothing. What a fucked up dream to have. Oh, and do you know what else has been happening since I brought home that picture? My electronics have been fucking up. My laptop shuts down on its own. Even with a full battery, my TV randomly turns to static. My phone keeps getting no reception. Along with the opening of doors, the constant sound of footsteps at night. I mean, you get the pictures, right? I'm burning it tonight. I'm taking it out back and setting that fucking picture ablaze. No. No, 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 no. This cannot be happening. I watched that get burned last night. I took that piece of paper outside last night and I watched it burn. How can it be back? What kind of twisted bastard would put a duplicate copy through someone's mailbox? This isn't funny. I came and phoned for help because my electronics won't stop acting up. And I'm too paranoid to leave the house now. I don't know what to do. Things are getting too much to cope with now. Day after day, more and more of those damn pictures keep coming through. Nothing works in the house, and I keep thinking I'm seeing him in my house. Whenever I leave the room, I think I catch a small glimpse of him in my peripheral vision, or in the corner of the mirror I pass by. It's driving me insane. Has this thing really invaded my home? If so, there's no safety to be had. If it can get me here, it can get me anywhere. Doesn't mean I won't go down without a fight, though. Okay, I blocked my doors and all the windows. Took enough food and water from the kitchen to last me about a week. I'm going to hold up in my room for as long as possible. I don't feel safe outside, nor do I feel safe in my own home. This is my last resort. I know he's got something sinister in store for me. I just know it. Why else would he go through such lengths to scare me to the brink of my sanity? Well, I barricaded myself in my room for now. Nothing's getting in here without my say-so. But it's getting late. I'm going to try and get some shut-eye. Shit! What was that? I swear I heard something move. It must have, because it just woke me up. This is no ordinary footstep. This is no ordinary footstep that I heard at the beginning of all this. Oh no, that was a loud and deliberate thud. It must be messing with me. SlenderMan knows I'm here? I would get up out of bed to turn my lights on, but there's no point. He's been messing with all of the electrics. I lay here scared out of my mind, staring into total darkness. I know this sounds crazy, but have you ever seen a darker shade of black that normal? Like when you're in a dark room with only a little light and everything else casts a shadow? but some shadows seem darker than the others. I swear, even though I'm currently in near blind darkness, that corner is getting darker than the rest. It's the same corner that was in my last nightmare. It's like the darkness is moving. My night vision is getting better now. I can see a little more details. Oh no! No, 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 no! I can see the outline of the man form in the corner. A really tall, thin man. It looks like he's wearing a suit. Oh God. It's him. He's here, just like in my dreams. I lay here frozen in fear, wondering what's going to happen. He lifts his arm and stretches it across my room and over to my head. He rests his hands. No, no, no. These aren't hands. These are tendrils on my forehead. I thought about grabbing his arm and trying to push it away, or getting up out of bed and trying to break down the door, but something told me there's no use. Nothing would help me now. His tendrils grew in length and snaked down my entire body, slowly, wrapping themselves around me into some sort of blackened cocoon. Before I could scream, the blackness reached my face and covered my mouth. As it enveloped my head, the last thing to be covered were my eyes, which were firmly shut the whole time. I decided to open them one last time. I looked directly up, and he was there, standing directly over me, looking down. That was the last thing I saw before the darkness claimed me. Although he has no face, I swear he smiled. The end. That would be the original. Again, that's SlenderMan. Who wrote this? Josh Dean. All right, so this was written by Josh Dean over on CreepyPasta. And bro, like this story. Fuck. I remember this story. Now that I've read it. This was, yeah. I don't remember reading this on CreepyPasta back in 2012. I definitely remember seeing pictures and other shit circulating around, be just like all around social media, mostly Facebook, because that's where I remember this thing blowing up, is on Facebook and even Twitter. So many people were freaking out about this. There were so many sightings and all that stuff, but bro, that was the fuck up on a lot of like the pronunciation or the sentence structure. That this story was on me. This story was properly written. So any mess ups, that's 100% me. I was reading it as it was written in certain sections. I messed up on accident. Bro, that's right. This is the first time I truly read this entire story, so that's awesome. That's a great story. So, but with that said, again, if you want to listen to these stories or you enjoy this type of reading or podcast, definitely let us know. Hit us up over on social media. Hit us up on YouTube. And let us know. Other than that, make sure to add this to your podcast playlist. Stay up to date with all future and current episodes. It is 31 days of Halloween when this is recording. So this entire month we're releasing episodes or short / YouTube videos, TikToks, focused around the Halloween theme, just like this episode. So I do hope you enjoyed it. And you should have Rago back on the next episode, ideally. So without further ado, thank you so much for listening. Hope you enjoyed. And until next time, everyone, take care.